If you've ever considered switching to Linux but felt intimidated by the installation process, today's video is for you. Gone are the days when installing Linux required manual disk partitioning, deep terminal knowledge, and an encyclopedic understanding of networking. Modern Linux distributions have evolved to the point where installing a fully functional operating system can be as simple as downloading an ISO, creating a bootable USB, and clicking through a graphical wizard. In this video, we'll explore 5 of the easiest Linux distributions to install. Whether you're a complete beginner or simply looking for a hassle-free setup, these distros let you go from ISO download to a working desktop in 10 minutes or less. 1. Ubuntu. Why Ubuntu? Ubuntu remains synonymous with beginner-friendly Linux. Developed and maintained by Canonical, Ubuntu's popularity stems not only from its extensive software repositories, but also from an installation process that has been refined over many releases. As of version 25th April, Ubuntu introduced a brand new installer called the Ubuntu Desktop Installer, which replaces the older Ubiquity interface. This installer focuses on clarity and speed, reducing the number of clicks and eliminating confusing options that can trip up new users. Installation highlights: point-and-click wizard. From selecting your language to configuring time zones and user accounts, every step is straightforward. Fast performance. On modest hardware, for example, a virtual machine with 3 GB of RAM and a dual-core CPU, the entire installation can finish in as little as 2 to 5 minutes. On a typical modern laptop or desktop, you can expect the process to hover around the lower end of that range. Default settings work for most. Unless you require advanced disk partitioning, simply selecting Erase Disk and Install Ubuntu is safe and recommended. The installer also offers to download updates and third-party proprietary drivers during installation, so you're ready to go with a fully updated system when you first log in. Why it's ideal for beginners: Canonical's emphasis on an intuitive installer means that someone who has never used Linux before can follow the on-screen prompts without referring to documentation or online guides. Parents, grandparents, or kids helping a friend set up a Linux box will appreciate how straightforward this process is. Second, Zorin OS. Why Zorin OS? Built on Ubuntu's core, Zorin OS takes the same rock-solid foundation and dresses it up in a polished, Windows-like interface designed to put new users at ease. Given that Zorin OS continues to rely on the Ubiquity installer, the installation steps closely mirror the older